Next, we need to add a service to handle the actual mailing of the contact message. So we're going to go ahead and add a service to our project. And I'm going to create a new folder called Services. And here I'm going to just add a new file called iMail Service. This will be an interface that implements the mail service contract, because we may have one or more types of mail services we're going to support. So this public interface, I will call it iMail Service, and we'll simply have a call that returns a Boolean for send mail. I have a string for who to send it to, a string for who to send it from, a string for the subject, and then lastly a string for the body. But now we need a class that implements that interface. So I'm going to add another new file called debug mail service. I'm creating a debug mail service specifically to support the scenario of developers. We don't want to be sending tons of mail when we're testing other parts of the system. So this allows us just to replace one that'll dump out to the debug stream the fact that we wanted to send a mail. And we'll do that by creating a public class calling debug mail service, and we'll just implement the iMail service interface. We can do that with the control period, which is going to pop up implement the interface. And because all this particular version of it is going to be doing is writing out to the debug window, let's just do that. Debug.writeLine. And here I'll use a C#6 feature, which is string interpolation. So I'll be able to say sending mail to 2. And you can see those curly braces around the 2 are going to inject that into the form. This is an easier way to do the string.format that we're probably all familiar with if you've done .NET before. And I'm not going to include all the properties, just a couple of them. You'll notice we're actually getting IntelliSense inside the string interpolation so that we can do that even quicker and make sure that we have things spelled right. And let's go ahead and return true in every case here. There's no case where we really want to test for the sending of the mail working or not. So it won't be true if we implement a real version of a mail service, but for now, that'll be good enough. In order to supply this mail service to our app controller, we're going to want the controller to have a constructor, because inside ASP.NET 5, all of the service locator, all of the dependency injection that happens is controller injection. Now, if you plug in a different dependency injection layer, like you went with NuGet or one of the other guys, they could support some different things than will work out of the box. But the subsystem that ASP.NET 5 uses for dependency injection really relies a lot on the constructor injection. Though you are free to use any dependency injection layer you want, they just wanted one to be included in the box by default. So I'll go ahead and add mail service. And notice I'm adding the interface. That way, this class doesn't need to know which implementation it's using. It just knows it's using an implementation of the mail service. And I'll go ahead and just store that as a local field. And I'm going to use refactoring to go ahead and just create that field for me. But how does it know to actually use the constructor injection here at all? When this app controller is created, how does ASP.NET 5 know to go ahead and send this in? It knows this because it's looking at the different kinds of constructors we have and attempting to fulfill them when someone needs one of these controllers. When a request comes in that resolves to this app controller, when it notices there isn't a default constructor, it's going to go ahead and look for services that match the properties here in the parameters of the constructor that's left. So back in startup, it looks for these by looking at all the interfaces that are registered to the service collection here. The services.add MVC actually goes through and calls the services collection to include all these different interfaces that MVC actually needs and supplies in its own processes. So we're going to actually add it here and configure services. We're going to say services add scoped. And this is going to allow us to supply a service. So the first thing it's going to want is the name of the interface. So when looking for this object type, and in our case that's an interface, what is the concrete class? What is the implementation class to call new on? And in our case that will be debug mail service. And so by creating the scoped collection, this will allow the app controller to get an instance of the mail service. And if it hasn't already created an instance, it will create a new instance based on the debug mail service. But of course, this is for our testing. This isn't for real use for production. So one common way you can get around this is actually to say if debug, and for all of you listening that have done .NET before, this is probably old hat, but let me be really specific about how this works. So when not in debug, we will probably have something like a mail service class or a real mail service class or whatever you end up calling it. Through the creation of the course, we don't have time to actually implement this for you. There's a lot of examples out there, but the idea here is that we're going to make that change. Now that we have that, our app controller should get this mail service as we expect, and then we can go ahead and use it down here in the contact view. Mail service, send mail, and we don't know who to and from yet, but we can go ahead and get the subject. Let's put these on separate lines so they're a little easier to read. I'll use that string interpolation again. And notice that I'm getting IntelliSense and usability for not just local variables, but properties of those local variables. And then finally for the body, we'll actually just send them the message. So we can implement the mail service in exactly the way we want. Now, who we're sending this from or to is actually going to be based on some configuration, and we'll do that in a minute. But at this point, we should have the contact page actually working. But we're still not doing some important pieces, especially as we feed back to the user. Let's do that next when we complete the form.